Hello and welcome to our COVID, the Mason Impact course again today. Welcome to the second day of class. We are glad that you are all here. I'm Bethany Usher, as a reminder, and for some of y'all, this is the first time you've been able to make it to class. I know many of you were still registering yesterday. We have a full class, almost 500 students are registered now, and we are glad to have you. I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. If you're new to the class, make sure if you've gotten here, you've already been in the Blackboard course, but I want to make sure you're reading the syllabus, the Start Here page, and the announcements. We'll be sending emails and through announcements regularly, but not every day. But there is information for you if you are a new student. A couple of other things I want to go over before we begin with our guest speaker today. The first thing I wanted to do was sort of go through again what we expect, because we got a bunch of questions yesterday, sort of what do we expect you to do on a daily basis. So every day that there's a speaker, remember they're Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 5 o'clock, we want you to go in and look at that week's folder and then look at the speaker's folder for that day. You want to read through the biography of the speaker. You want to read through the information about the preparatory material and the prompts. And I really think you ought to read the prompts as one of the first things you're going to do, so you have those in mind as you start looking at the preparatory material. And then at 5 o'clock, you want to log on so that you can participate in the conversation with the guest speaker. The other important part about that is, as you're reading those things, be jotting down questions you'd like to ask the guest speaker. And during the talk, one of the things we want you to do is there are two buttons at the bottom of your Zoom screen. One is a chat button, and it allows you to ask questions to panelists. Panelists are really me, the TAs, and the speaker, but really for me and the TAs. If you have questions that are about the course itself, grading, how to answer questions, where to find things, we want you to put it in the chat at the bottom. We want to reserve the Q&A section to be questions for the speaker. And a reminder for the questions, one of the cool things you can do, and you can keep that little box open on the side as you're watching. One of the things we want you to do is you can not only watch the questions and type in your own questions, and you can type them in, especially if you want questions answered as they're going, because the speaker can often see the questions also. You can also vote up a question as you see them go by. So you can put the little thumbs up, like button. And as you do that, that actually moves them to the top, so we're more likely to see them. So questions that you really want to see answered, move up. And I'm seeing a question right now to APA format. So if you've got questions that are about the format of the class or how to do assignments, put them in the chat. And questions that are for the speaker, put them in the Q&A. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's where we want to be able to do this. And we want you to be active with the questions. So you want to be, as you're prepping for the day, be thinking about questions, and then continue to modify them and write them down and write them in as you're speaking. The other thing, and then after the speaker, then we want you to go back into Blackboard and respond to the prompt. And the prompt at the top of the box will lead you to a discussion board. In that box, in that discussion board prompt, there are often 2 or 3 sort of leading questions in there. We want you to synthesize your answer to that. It's not an A, B, C, and it's also not an or. So it's not you answer this part or this part. They are prompts to get you to think about putting together a concise answer. And so remember that what I said yesterday was we want you to be able to look at the prompts. We want you to draft and write the response in another Word document or in a Google Doc. Edit what you're doing, make sure it makes sense. You want college level writing, you want a creative and interesting and respectful answer, and then put it into the discussion board. And then you can also have a conversation, and I see that's already happening in the discussion boards. We would really like for you to do that in the first 24 hours after the talk. That way you have it done before the next one happens. But they're always due by 5 o'clock, they're due by midnight on Friday of the week of the talks. And you need to have at least 2 satisfactory answers per week to be able to get credit. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is contacting us. We've got information in Blackboard about using the impactgm@gmu.edu email address. The other important thing is you need to use your GMU, your Mason Live email address, your GMU issued email address to write to us so that we know who you are. And we also need you to use that to be able to write. You should write respectfully to us, make sure you sign your name. And the other thing is, as college students, you need to write to us if you've got questions. We have gotten some parents writing to us, and we're not answering questions from parents. You are the students in the class. It is up to you to take responsibility. So we can't answer questions unless they're coming from you and from your GMU address. And that'll be true of your entire time at Mason. You need to make sure that you are using your Mason address. And we're happy to be able to answer questions. Remember too that it makes sense. There are a lot of you, and we do look at the email all the time, but we've got 24 hours to respond to you sometimes. Sometimes your answers are in Blackboard. So with that set of announcements, I want to again tell you how happy I am that you're joining us and how interesting this series is and how lucky I feel that I get to learn alongside you as we learn about all of these multiple aspects about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has really revealed really interesting questions about the way we live in the world, from a global to a local to a personal perspective. And yesterday we heard from Dr. Roes, who sort of laid the groundwork for where we've been with COVID-19, and it leads really nicely into our conversation today with Dr. Jennifer Victor, who's in political science and is an expert in looking at how politics work in government with the kinds of social implications that we're looking at. So with that, I'm going to turn it over today. A reminder that after Dr. Victor gives her talk, we'll open it up for Q&A, and we'll do Q&A until 6:15. Make sure to put your questions about the talk in the Q&A and then vote them up and down as you go. So with that, Dr. Victor, I'm thrilled to have you here today. Thanks for being able to take time to be able to talk with us.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I'm thrilled to have been asked to do this. This has been a fun presentation to prepare, and I always love meeting new Mason students. I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to start just introducing myself a little bit. Many of you have no context for who I am before I share my screen and launch into the presentation, and thank the TAs in advance who are helping to troubleshoot the variety of issues that a few of you are having. So I hope those get managed. I'll also say at the outset that I am okay if you have clarifying questions that come up during the presentation. You can't read something on a graph, or you didn't quite catch something that I said. I'm okay answering clarifying questions on the fly. I'm going to keep the Q&A open, so I'll try to see those as they come. If they are larger questions or things that I think might take me down a tangent, which I have a tendency to do sometimes, I'll probably just ignore those and try to get them at the end of the session. But it's okay to pop in the clarifying questions in the Q&A as we go. All right, who am I? I'm Professor Jennifer Victor. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science in the Schar School of Policy and Government. I've been here at Mason since 2012. Before that, I was on faculty for 9 years at the University of Pittsburgh in the political science program. And my area of expertise is in American politics. So particularly the US Congress, American political parties, campaign finance, lobbying, and other things that are kind of broken right now. My areas of research and in teaching focus in these areas. So the book project that I'm working on right now, for example, looks at the ways that members of Congress are connected to one another. I'm very interested in social networks and different kinds of network connections between political actors and how their common relationships of all types, professional and otherwise, help to contribute to the political outcomes that you and I observe. And so that's where the focus of my research is. This coming fall, I'm teaching 2 classes. I'm the instructor for one of the large sections of Introduction to American Politics. So if you're an incoming Mason student and you're looking to knock out that GE class, General Mason Core class, I'll be your instructor, perhaps. I'm also teaching an upper level government class that's a special topics class on the 2020 elections. So I'm pretty excited to dive into election oriented stuff. If you have other things that you want to ask about my background or my research, please visit my website. You can Google me. I'm pretty easy to find out there on the interwebs. I'm active on Twitter. My handle is Jennifer and Victor. I'm easy to find. All right, I don't want to talk about myself too much. I want to leave the time for the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to start the presentation. I need to rearrange some boxes here. All right, if you cannot see or hear what I've got going, I hope somebody will alert me to that. Either one of the TAs will just turn on their audio real quick, or somebody will tell me in the Q&A. In any case, I'm going to introduce the topics of talking about the politics of COVID-19. And I want to start this by talking about, sorry, get the slides working correctly here, by talking about why, to sort of motivate the question here. And the main question that I want to motivate at the outset is, why does it seem like COVID-19 is kind of going worse in the United States than it is in a lot of other countries? So if we look, for example, at the number of cases in the United States compared to a number of other countries, you can see here that the number of cases in the US, is quite a bit higher than it is in a lot of other countries. The outbreak occurred first in China, as you know, and then in Europe. But the trajectory of cases in places like Spain and France are quite a bit more leveled now than it is in the United States. We've got huge trajectory in Brazil, which may potentially surpass the United States at some point. It's important to note that the data that I'm sharing here is from the European CDC, and it shows a per capita description of the number of cases. So it's cases per million people. If we look, for example, though, at the number of deaths, the United States is a little bit more in the middle of the pack of this set of countries. So we're not doing great on number of deaths either, but it looks like in some ways so far, at least on a per capita basis, we're doing better than Spain and France and the UK, although the trajectories still don't look great for the United States. So if you take any of political science class, mine or anybody else's really, one of the big themes that I settle on is often that institutions matter. And when a political scientist uses a term like institutions, what I'm really saying is the rules, the way the government is set up, the way that policies are set up. It's the rules that structure society, that structure the game, that are so important for understanding how we get different kinds of political outcomes. And so one of the things I want to focus on here today is how the institutions of government and politics in the United States are pivotal in understanding how we got to where we are with the coronavirus. And I both want to talk about how the pandemic affects politics and how politics affects the pandemic. And so to do that, I want to focus on three primary questions. So the first one is this one that I've motivated the talk with, which is, why does it seem like the US is struggling to contain the outbreak compared to a lot of other countries? So I have four answers for that question that will help us understand that phenomenon a little bit better. And the second is, how does the coronavirus affect what I think of as America's pre-existing condition, if you will, which is, I see as dysfunction in American politics. And so I want to talk about what the source of that dysfunction is and how the pandemic affects it. Interestingly, a lot of scholars like me who study polarization, partisan polarization in the United States, for a long time, a bunch of us wondered if there was a crisis big enough that it's possible that it could positively affect polarization. You know, if the dinosaurs came back to life, or a meteor hit, or aliens invaded, or something big like that happened that really had no bearing whatsoever on politics, events like that have the capacity to, in some ways, bridge the divides of partisanship and heal partisanship enough, at least with respect to addressing that crisis, that it can really help a system get beyond some of the dysfunction caused by polarization. But as we're going to see, COVID-19 had the potential to do that at the beginning. And for a couple of weeks, actually, it almost kind of did. But what we've seen since then is things have gotten a lot worse, and I'm going to explain why. And then the last question is how we can effectively run elections during a pandemic. So at the end of the day, we're not a democracy if we don't have elections. We have to figure out how to have elections. And so I want to talk about that in particular. And I see the questions about polarization coming up in the Q&A, and I'm going to address that. So I'm going to ask you to hold on to that one for a little bit. All right, so why is COVID apparently worse in the United States by a lot of measures than it is in many other countries? Four answers to that question. Number one, the first answer has to do with essentially inadequate government response and variation in government response. So the United States has a federal system. We have a national government, we have state governments, we have sub-governments under that at the county and municipal levels. And at the very beginning of the outset, the federal government downplayed the risk. This was apparently a political strategy, essentially on behalf of the Trump administration, where at the beginning, so on March 24th, the president was saying the US would be completely open by April 12th. When the virus was first discovered and in the news, that they were claiming it wouldn't come to the United States. And when there were only a few cases, they said those numbers would go down. So there was a lot of downplaying of the risk that was essentially a political strategy to try to keep panic from spreading. And this is a relatively common thing for political leaders to do when there's something very worrying or very scary out there. It's the job of a political leader to try to make people feel more comfortable. And that downplaying of risk was part of the messaging strategy that the federal government used at the outset. But then what happened was, at first, while there was some downplaying, then there was a very slow initial response. So what we saw from the White House at the beginning was the Trump administration put a lot of faith in Anthony Fauci and Dr. Fauci and his whole task force and the other people that were leading that response. And this is actually a tried and true way for political leaders to handle crises. The research shows that when people are anxious about something happening in the world or something happening in politics, particularly if it's something like a biological threat or something that is kind of science-y in some way, that what makes people feel better about it is for experts to lead the response. So rather than political leaders to really be leading the response, if the political leaders just point at the experts and say, let's hear what the scientists have to say about that, it tends to give people a much greater sense of reassurance. And so it's a common political strategy that leaders used. And the White House was doing that at first, but the response wound up being slower and much less coordinated than we would have liked to have seen in the United States. And the slowness is actually really important. So if you heard Dr. O.S.'s talk yesterday, one of the things she talked about is the scientific ways that we know about how to contain an epidemic so that it doesn't become a pandemic. And the ways to do that, I like to think of it as sort of a test, trace, and trap strategy. So first you have to know where the virus is, you have to know who's been exposed to it, and then you have to contain it to that area. And so if you do widespread testing and you test the people who you believe have been exposed, and then you figure out who else has been exposed, this is what we mean when we talk about contact tracing, then you can define all the population of people who have been put at risk of having the virus. And if you get all those folks to go quarantine themselves until we know that they're either well or that they've recovered, then you contain the virus from spreading. Every outbreak that we've had and successfully contained in the last number of decades has more or less been contained by a strategy of this type. And so when the federal government was particularly slow to engage in widespread testing, the CDC had problems with their initial testing kits, there weren't enough testing kits, it gave time for the virus to spread to a point where this traditional test, trace, and trap strategy was essentially not viable anymore because the virus had spread too far. So there was no longer the possibility of doing kind of micro shutdowns. And then what we were led to was a situation where everything had to shut down. But the federal government has been reluctant to do that from the federal government standpoint. And so here's where federalism comes into play. In most ways, the way to think about the federal government or the government response to COVID is that the federal government's slow and they've had difficulty sustaining that response means that state governments and county governments have been much better positioned to be sort of the first responders to the virus crisis. And in a lot of ways, this makes sense for a couple of reasons. So first of all, things like public health and public education are very much more in the jurisdictional purview of state governments and local governments than they are in the federal government. So we don't really have a federal government health system that could be a little bit more complicated. I'm going to oversimplify things there a little bit. We don't really have federal education policy. The federal government doesn't really run education, for example, in the way that states and counties and localities do. So in some ways, it's appropriate for a public health crisis or an education crisis to be resolved at a more local level. But what you get then, what we have had, is that the response has been so dominated by state level action that states are really where it's happening. It's more like, if you want to understand how the coronavirus is doing in your area, you're going to look to your local leaders and to your governor to figure out what the situation in your state is, how bad the spread is, what the rules are for mask wearing, how shut down things are, what phases things are at. All of this stuff is happening at the state level. So each state is operating more like its own little country in terms of virus response than the United States is as a country. And some of that is because of the institutions that were already in place to do that. And some of that is just this reluctance on behalf of the current administration to provide that national coordinating effort. So this lack of willingness to coordinate at the state and local level has strongly contributed to the spread of COVID in the United States. I'm not going to go widely down the rabbit hole here about how much variance we've had across states. And I'll let you do a little bit of research on that on your own if you like. But essentially, every state is doing their own thing. We see a little bit of policy contagion, as you might call it, as states are copying one another. A state tries something, it works or it doesn't work, and then other states either do or don't do those same kinds of things. But states are mostly in a position where they're being reactive rather than proactive. But when it comes to virus response and containment, proactive is where you want to be. If you're being reactive, you've already lost with respect to a virus. It means it's everywhere. And so states have been, had varied responses in their ability to be proactive and to engage in different policymaking decisions about how they shut down. Okay, so one reason it's spreading is this varied government response. The second is the United States has essentially lacks a sufficient social safety net to respond to a crisis of this type. So before COVID hit, 28 million Americans lacked health insurance. And you can imagine that it's suboptimal. It's not desirable to go into a pandemic with millions of people that lack health insurance or lack regular access to healthcare, or who lack regular treatment for their ongoing or chronic conditions, which might make them more vulnerable to a virus. At the time that the economy was disrupted then, we had, so essentially what happened was, because of the slow response, instead of having micro shutdowns, we had to have a macro shutdown of everything. And Americans have turned out to have not a lot of patience for that. And it was hugely disruptive to the economy. So we've seen this huge uptick in the number of people who have applied for unemployment insurance. We've seen income insecurity, housing insecurity, food insecurity. And the systems that the United States already has in place to deal with those things are essentially not adequate to deal with them at the level that we are experiencing now because of the pandemic. And so we have these really overstrained, locally driven social systems. So we had 30 million newly unemployed people in the spring, which is an unprecedented record for the United States. We did see that many unemployed people back during the Great Depression era, but it took 2 years during the Great Depression for us to get to 25 million unemployed people. And here in coronavirus, we did it within a couple of months. So it's really a dire situation when it comes to thinking about the economic disruption to people's lives. Many of these people who have become unemployed will lose their health insurance because inexplicably, well, not inexplicably, but undesirably in this situation in the United States, we tie health insurance to jobs. That's the system that most people have. Many of the people who lose their health insurance from their employment, from their loss of employment, will get it through the ACA, but between 5 and 10 million of them will be unable to. And then the last point about this lack of a sufficient social safety net is that vulnerable populations are at greater risk for contracting the coronavirus. So if you are newly unemployed, or if you've got a job where you just have to be out in society more, or if you already have underlying health conditions, you're at greater risk to all of this. And so the lack of the social safety net is putting these vulnerable populations at greater risk. Okay, reason number 3. Spread is worse in the United States. Class and race-based inequalities are rendering some people more vulnerable than others to the virus. So racial minorities are more likely to have underlying health conditions that place them at greater risk for COVID. And that's something that, that's a topic I'm going to return to again in a couple of minutes here. COVID has also struck communities of color at a significantly greater rate than it has struck whites. So a recent report some excellent data reported from the New York Times recently showed that people of color, so Blacks and Latinos in this case, are 3 times more likely to contract coronavirus and 2 times more likely to die of COVID-19 compared to whites. So the racial disparities of coronavirus are really significant. And it's really driving the way that some of the inequalities and the widespread infections are spreading now are going. And so we've also seen, not coincidentally during this period, this uptick in awareness about structural racism and racial inequality that is in a lot of ways baked into the United States. It's baked into our social structures, into our government systems in ways that many people have been unaware of, or at least willing to give a pass to. And now that we can see how we have so much more evidence now about how baked in some of the structural racism is, and how that is leading to greater effect of the pandemic in those communities, it's creating this confluence of events that is bringing greater awareness. So that's where the source of some of the Black Lives Matter unrest has come from, in addition to other news events that have occurred. And it's one of the most compelling stories about how this disease is spreading. And on the class side of things, if you're a white collar worker, if you work in an office job, you're much more easily able to adapt to a quarantine situation. I have a job where I work at a computer. I work with students. I write research. I read and write for a living, essentially. And I can do that from my home. It's not ideal. I don't like teaching this way, but I can do it, and it's got its upsides for me. But a lot of people don't have that privilege. They don't have a job that allows them to do that, and that is exacerbating the economic inequalities that already existed in the United States, and COVID is making those worse. And I'm gonna return to that topic again in a couple of minutes. Okay, number 4. The United States culture, the political culture, has a tension between individualism and collective action. And what I mean here, and this is a broader theme, political theme, that I'd like to go into deeper, but I'm just going to kind of brush the surface here. And that is that individual liberty and collective action are both really important political values. And they are in lots of ways in tension with one another. They are at odds with one another. What I mean by that is we value liberty. We value individual agency and our ability to speak what we want and practice religion as we want and to do things that we like. But we also have a value for doing things as a collective, as a society. And this is what I teach my students in my classes, is that this is really the main purpose of government, or one of the main purposes of government, is to help individuals achieve goals that they can only achieve as a group, as a collective. So for example, if we want to create clean air or cleaner water, me doing something in myself, if I'm going to ditch my car and only ride my bike, that's not going to help air get cleaner, right? That's one person doing something. If everybody does that, well then, yeah, okay, now air is cleaner. So these collective goods that occur only when a lot of people do them are very difficult to organize sometimes. And this is the role that government plays. It both values individual liberty and provides the coordinating mechanism that allows people to engage in collective action that provide these public goods, these collective goods that benefit society. And when these two things come in tension, you can see very naturally how it does so. If I'm going to create a rule that enforces some collective action, I am very naturally taking away your liberty to do that. Traffic lights or seatbelt laws, or a law that says you have to build a fence around a backyard swimming pool. All of these are things intended to coordinate actions and to increase public safety, but they also strip away your liberty in some ways. And so these two things that we value are in tension, and we see this happening now very explicitly with COVID. By submitting to state authority, by giving into wearing masks or agreeing to stay home or following these protocols that are intended to increase public health, you are necessarily relinquishing some individual liberty to do so. And many people are happy to do that. They see it as an act of generosity towards their community, and they say, I'm willing to give up my freedom to go to school or go to work or go grocery shopping or whatever as an act of trying to keep my neighbors safe, because there's so much about this virus that's just insidious. But many people have begun to take offense at that and has begun to feel the stress of that loss of individual liberty. And what's really important here is what political scientists call elite messaging. When political scientists use the term elite, what they mean to refer to is elected leaders. So political elites are those who hold power, who hold public office. And so when public office holders when they send a message that says, we need everybody to chip in, we're going to take some collective sacrifices, I need everybody to stay home as a way to protect public health, then that type of messaging is more likely to engender that sense of giving to the public good. But when the political elites are are emphasizing the individual liberty aspect, they're emphasizing the individual agency and the freedom and the imposition that collective action imposes on those individual liberties, then it makes people feel less like giving to their neighbors and more like asserting their individual rights. And what's going on in the Trump administration is they have, even though at the beginning there was some messaging about collective sacrifice, now what we've got is a lot more messaging from the Trump administration about that individualism. And it turns out that Donald Trump is, in the words of my colleague and co-blogger Julia Azari, particularly ill-suited for a crisis of this type. So Trump's brand of politics is anti-elitist, it's anti-science, it's very much more focused on individual liberties than it is on collective sacrifices, and is often about stoking racial divisions and about general antipathy towards government. And all of those things are the things that make a pandemic worse, right? We see all of that coming to play in the pandemic. And so the elite messaging that we're getting from the very top is contributing to a worse outcome of the spread of the virus. All right, so let me sum up this part of the talk. So why is coronavirus apparently worse in the United States than a lot of other countries? Inadequate and highly variable government response that's been federalized in the federalist structure, so that states and localities are much more in control and we don't have much national coordination. 2, insufficient social safety net. As the lockdown got worse and economic disparities got really bad, we didn't have enough social safety net in place. Class and race-based inequalities have completely exacerbated during this pandemic and are rendering people of color much more vulnerable to the disease than whites. And that is playing into this politics of racial division that Donald Trump really values and is using for his reelection campaign, that emphasizes individualism over collective action. Okay. All of these are skimming the topic, and I could go a lot deeper on these, but these are my 4 basic reasons that I think help us understand why coronavirus spread is worse in the United States than some other countries. Okay, so back to the talk outline. So we've hit number 1, and now we're going on to number 2. How does COVID-19 affect America's pre-existing condition, which is dysfunctional politics? And again, I'm going to ask for some forgiveness and use some broad brushstrokes to talk about this. But scholars who study political dysfunction have noted that, and I see in the Q&A, a number of you are saying, could Obama have potentially done better? Maybe. That's a really hard counterfactual for us to know. Knowing something about the brand of Obama politics and the brand of Trump politics, it seems likely that he would have, because he's not anti-science. He doesn't stoke racial divisions in the same way for political gain, and he's much more in favor of using government to solve problems. But there's lots of reasons to think it might not have gone well for him either. But I point to that question and thinking about that counterfactual for this particular reason, which is the dysfunction that occurs in politics today is really deeply seated. It goes back to the 1970s. So the seeds of polarization, of partisan polarization that we have in the United States now started in the 1970s. And it's largely due to inequalities that were set in place at that time. As the political parties bifurcated on ideology as a result of the end of the Civil Rights era, Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act in the mid-1960s, and Richard Nixon came in with a strategy that was intended to bring disaffected racial conservatives from the Democratic Party into the Republican Party. As this political strategy played out over generations, and we changed tax laws and campaign finance laws and a number of other government structures that were put in place in the 1970s, some of which were hugely impactful in positive ways, they also wound up setting the seeds for polarization in ways that nobody realized at the time, but are now very apparent. And what's happened is, as inequality, particularly income inequality, but I'm going to talk about some others as well, as inequality has broadened, so the rich are richer, the poor are poorer, and the middle class has shrunk, it has led to this significant partisan polarization that has taken hold. What this means is that Trump didn't cause this. And that's why I'm bringing up the Obama question in the Q&A. Trump is much more a symptom of this dysfunction than he is a cause. He's been an amplifier in lots of ways. But the root of all of this goes back much, much further. Clinton didn't cause it. Obama didn't cause it. Nixon didn't cause it either. It's quite a bit more complicated than that. But the roots of the polarization go back at least 40 years. But once you get those inequality policies in place, you set the seeds for polarization, it creates the condition gridlock. What happens in partisan polarization is you get more ideological extremists in both parties, and the gulf between the two parties widens. And what happens in that case is people start defining partisanship by in-group and out-group identifiers. In other words, if you identify, everybody has a political identity, whether you're conscious of it or not, you have a political identity. And when you come in contact with new politicians or new information or new issues, the first thing that happens is your brain figures out how to organize that information as something that's a part of your in-group, the parts of your political identity that are about you, that you identify with, or if it's your out-group, the things that you don't identify with. And it turns out it's way easier to identify the things in your out-group than the things in your in-group. And as the out-group and the in-group get further apart because of polarization, it creates gridlock for a couple of reasons. One of them is, as those two sides get further apart, there's no more room for negotiation or compromise. Because what happens is, if I think you're in my political out-group and you've offered a policy solution or some idea to address a problem, I'm predisposed to think it's a bad idea because you're in my out-group. And my incentives to try to find points of commonality or to bargain or negotiate with you lessen as the difference between our two groups widens, right? So there's both less room for negotiation and less incentive to negotiate with out-groups. I could go on more about that, but this is how we get the conditions of gridlock that makes it so hard for politics to function. And once you have gridlock, what you see is an increasing, or excuse me, a decreasing valuation of democratic norms and democratic values. One of the books that I've posted at the end of the talk that I think is really informative for our times is this book written by a couple of political scientists at Harvard. The book is called How Democracies Die. And the theme of that book is that we understand from a comparative politics perspective, looking at other countries, the conditions under which democracies are successful and those in which democratic decline occurs is when people stop valuing democratic norms. One of the most important democratic norms that is necessary for a democracy to function is you have to have respect for that political outgroup. There has to be a mutual toleration or a mutual respect of political adversaries. As soon as the adversaries don't respect one another anymore, if you're in my political outgroup and I think you're literally dangerous to me and I'm scared of you and you anger me whenever you speak, it's very hard for me to get into a situation where I'm now going to value that part of democracy that says we should compromise and we should listen to the other side and we should value free speech and all voices should be heard. All of that gets harder as you have polarization, gridlock, and the decline of these democratic norms for mutual toleration of political adversaries. I'm using a lot of buzzwords, so I hope I'm not talking too fast. But what happens as people have less appreciation for tolerating political adversaries, your outgroup, then their preference to value the very nature of democracy, the very institutions and values that keep a democracy thriving, become less. And that then contributes to greater inequality and more intolerance of different groups. And so this becomes this self-perpetuating cycle in a way. The more inequality, the more polarization, the more gridlock, the decline in values. And so we've got this cycle that's been going on in kind of an uncontrolled way in some ways for a number of decades now. And then you add a pandemic on top of it. And as I said at the outset, it was possible for the pandemic to bridge divides. It was possible for people to say, whoa, this is it's an act of God. It's a state of nature that has been imposed on all of us, regardless of party. And we need to attack it from all sides and, come together regardless of partisan differences to address it. It's the alien invasion that polarization scholars have been talking about for some time. The potential for that was there, but instead we've had the politics of division and political leaders who have been interested in using the pandemic to exacerbate inequalities and racial divisions and polarization. And so instead of being the potential upside of sort of addressing polarization, what instead we have is increasing inequality. So I want to focus on inequality now, and there's 4 types of inequality that I want to address briefly. First, income inequality, health inequality, education, and voting rights. Okay, so income inequality. So since the 1970s, income inequality has been growing in the United States. I hope you guys can all hear my dog barking. There's probably a squirrel in our backyard right now. Sorry about that. The Gini index, this is a common economic indicator that economists use to look at the gap between rich and poor in different countries or societies. And essentially starting in the 1970s, around this time of polarization that I'm talking about began, the Gini index for the United States started getting larger, right? So we have greater income inequality in the United States, where in the stock market, 90% of the wealth in the stock market is held by 10% of the population, right? So the stock market is helping rich people to be richer. So wealth helps to build wealth. And if you are already wealthy, it's much easier to gain more wealth. And it turns out it's incredibly expensive to be poor. And so these systems become self-reinforcing in that way. So we have increasing income inequality that puts a huge pressure on increasing partisan polarization. Then it exacerbates racial inequalities. And here's where COVID makes a big difference as well. So as I said before, if you are Native American, Black, or Latino, your likelihood of becoming in contact with, contracting coronavirus, and dying from coronavirus is 2 to 3 times greater than that of the white population. So we have huge racial disparities in the way coronavirus is addressing the population. And it all comes back to these systemic racial inequalities in society. I want to talk about 3 briefly that contribute to this: living conditions, working conditions, and health conditions. So people of color are more likely to live in urban and suburban settings than in rural settings on average. And so living in a more densely populated area means you're more likely to use public transportation. You come in to contact with other humans more regularly. population density. And so this increases the likelihood of it helps explain some of the disparities between people of color and whites with contracting and dying of coronavirus. There's a lot of good literature showing how much racial segregation we have in housing in all urban areas in the United States, some worse than others. And again, this goes back to really systemic things about zoning laws and the way that city laws and zoning laws and so forth have been developed, and access to loans and veterans benefits and all sorts of things contribute to this, to the racial segregation in housing. There's also a hugely disproportionate incarceration rate. People of color are much more likely to be incarcerated than whites, despite even in similar rates where crime is similar. And so turns out prison is a very good place to spread viruses. And so this also contributes to the racial disparity for coronavirus. Working conditions. People of color are more likely to have jobs that will increase their exposure to coronavirus. Health conditions. People of color are more likely to be uninsured. They're more likely to have pre-existing health conditions that make them more vulnerable to possible coronavirus. And again, this comes back to systemic inequalities in access to healthcare. People of color are more likely, they have higher rates of diabetes. Blacks have higher rates of diabetes, for example, and coronary heart disease, for example, for lots of reasons having to do with racial bias in the healthcare system, having to do with the chronic stress of facing racism, and other things that we're not going to go into today, but it contributes to our understanding of the racial disparity for COVID-19. All right. This is, third is education inequality. This is probably the last group I need to try to explain about how coronavirus has affected global education. But the numbers here are truly staggering. We're talking about over 1 billion children being put out of school during the spring of 2020. It's just an absolutely unprecedented, immediate drop-off of billions of kids being in school and then not. And the education, at first the education disruption was equal because nobody was going to school for a while, but the impact of the inequality there became apparent very rapidly. So compared to lower income families, those who have greater resources have greater access to computer hardware, they have easier access to internet, they may have family members who are more tech savvy and able to troubleshoot when tech problems come up. People who come from means may have more appropriate space and time to participate in online learning. They may have easier access to books than people of lesser means. So the coronavirus has just amplified and put a huge megaphone to understanding educational inequalities that are related to racial and income inequalities in the United States in ways that have really just put a magnifying glass to all of this. And they're really hard to solve, right? So in the classroom, everybody has ostensibly equal access to the teacher, but at home, it doesn't work the same way. And so we're just exacerbating inequalities because of the coronavirus. All right, last is voting rights. We have a huge history of unequal voting rights in the United States and inequality in voting rights. Most political scientists define democracy by the extent to which a society has suffrage rights for its adult citizens. And by many accounts, the United States has only done fairly well on this measure between about 1965 and 2013. At the beginning of the United States, between the 1790s and the beginning of the Civil War, suffrage was really strictly limited by race and gender. And so it was just the white males, and sometimes also you had to own property, and there were other restrictions sometimes in there as well, limiting people who had voting rights. After the Civil War, suffrage expanded for a brief period of time to newly freed slaves and to the Black population, particularly in the South, with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You had a quick and rapid expansion of suffrage rights to Blacks in the South, but it was very short-lived and temporary. The era of Jim Crow and sort of this backlash against Reconstruction begins in the mid-1880s, and it lasts for another 80 years as this sort of very violent and horrific era of Jim Crow that had really very strict racial segregation and strict voting right limits and so forth, particularly in the American South. In 1920, we get the passage of the 19th Amendment that expands voting rights to half, the other half of the white population, as women gain the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. But again, it really only guarantees suffrage rights for white women, not for women of color. Then in 1965, we get the Voting Rights Act, and that represents the greatest expansion of suffrage rights to the most Americans. And between 1965 and 2013 was sort of the heyday, it's sort of our most democratic period. In 2013, there was a Supreme Court case, Shelby County versus Holder, that put a huge jackhammer in one of the main provisions of the Voting Rights Act that has contributed to some rolling back of voting rights and increased use of ID laws and other laws that are limiting some access to the ballot and to suffrage rights in some parts of the country. But here's a silver lining. Here's some good news I can share with you. George Mason University has fantastic voting participation. In 2016, about 65% of Mason students voted, which is a huge number. It's better than our peer institutions. It's better of lots than most other public universities. George Mason has a fantastic history and reputation and infrastructure for fantastic, for really active civic participation and civic engagement. And we saw an uptick of civic engagement and voting participation from the 2012 election to the 2016. I'm hoping Mason can break the record. It's hard to get above 65%. I mean, still that says 35% of the population of the students aren't voting. That may seem like a high number, but in voting world, 65 is going to be hard to beat, but hopefully we'll be able to do it. All right, so in diagnosing this political dysfunction, we have inequality in income, healthcare, education, and voting rights that have contributed to partisan polarization, which led to gridlock, which led to a decline of democratic norms and values, which then all got exacerbated by the pandemic. And the pandemic put huge pressure on increasing inequalities of these types, which has essentially exacerbated political dysfunction in the United States. And if you feel like things are broken, this is why. Things are actually a little bit broken, maybe more than a little bit. All right, I'm running low on time, and I want to be sure to leave plenty of time for the Q&A because there's lots of great stuff coming up here. But let me quickly talk about the last question about running elections during a pandemic. So as I said before, you're not a democracy unless you hold elections. You have to have elections. It's it's literally what makes you a democracy. And holding an election during a pandemic, this pandemic in particular, is really challenging. Poll workers tend to be people who are older. Older people are in a higher risk category of contracting coronavirus. So that's a huge problem. States during the primary period in the spring, we've now got a little experience in running some elections during pandemic, and states that had outbreaks in order to try to reduce the number of people that would gather and collect, they reduced their number of polling sites. Well, that also created longer lines and reduced access to the ballot for a lot of people, and it impacted people of color more than whites. So again, we have that inequality there. But we've had a huge uptick in interest in vote by mail or vote from home and absentee balloting, although it's not universally available. We have wide variance across the states here. Some states have really restrictive absentee balloting procedures. Other states are much more liberal. There are 5 states in the United States right now that you can only vote by mail. You're not even allowed to vote in person. There are no in-person polling places in Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and a 5th state that isn't coming to mind right now. Virginia, I'm happy to report, has just recently gotten much better on this. You used to have to provide an excuse in order to vote by mail, but now you don't have to have an excuse, so you can register to vote in Virginia and not have and just say you want to apply for an absentee ballot, and they'll send you one. And so we have increased interest in voting at home, and it's going up by leaps and bounds because of the pandemic. But again, we have huge variation across states. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we actually do not hold national elections in the United States on anything. We don't even elect the president on a national vote. We hold not one election, but thousands of local elections more or less simultaneously on election day. Like healthcare and education, election administration is one of those things that is strictly under state control. And so we, again, have wide variance across the states. The federal government could play a larger role in creating more coordination and standards for states, but they've opted not to do so, at least at this point. Okay, and the last thing that comes into play with respect to the politics here and how it affects elections is that sadly, because of, in large part because of that elite messaging aspect that I was talking about earlier, we're seeing an increasing partisan polarization with respect to how partisans are interpreting the outbreak and responding to it. So just in the time period between April and June, Republicans are now more likely in June than in April to say that the worst is behind us and things are getting better, whereas Democrats are exactly the opposite. From April to June, they're now much more likely to say that the worst is yet to come. And it's this polarization between the parties is really only growing at this point. We can see it also, this Democratic and Republican split in how worried people are about coronavirus. Democrats are much more worried that they're going to get infected, that they're going to unknowingly infect their community members or their family members, or that they'll be hospitalized. Republicans are much less likely to be afraid of these things. And a lot of this has to do with the messaging that's coming from the White House. President Trump is telling Americans that they should be less afraid and they should assert this individualism, and Republicans are getting that message and Democrats are not. And so that's why we're seeing this difference. But it's not just about party. It's very much about race. And of course, these two things are related. The Republican Party is increasingly a party of whites, and the Democratic Party is increasingly home to people of color, not exclusively, but this trend has been growing over the decades. And so very much so, this story about attitudes, about how at risk you are to coronavirus is as much a story about a people of color versus whites difference as it is a Republican and Democratic difference. All right, let me sum up my main points here so we can move to the Q&A. The pandemic makes politics worse. There's no question. The idea that this was the alien invasion that could cure polarization, those days are long past us. We missed the window, and there are too many politicians that feel that they are politically benefiting from the politics of division and using the virus to help achieve that goal. The American response has been uncoordinated and really suboptimal compared to a lot of other countries, and we should really think of the US response as a state-by-state response rather than an all-country response. COVID essentially exacerbates existing systemic inequalities in the United States, particularly with respect to income and race. And these growing inequalities are the main source of political dysfunction in the United States. And so that's how the pandemic is making everything worse. The growing partisan divide in COVID response politicizes the pandemic and then threatens election integrity. That we've talked about. The good news is that most government institutions are functioning and functioning well. Many of them are overwhelmed right now, but a lot of them are doing really just fine. So what can you do? You can register to vote. You can double check that you're registered to vote. Virginia has a really nice citizen portal for doing all of this. And one of a Mason colleague, David Ramadan, was a former state legislator, was hugely involved with that. Give him a shout out there. You can help other people to vote. Voting is absolutely a social exercise. It turns out, this is another lecture, elections are not good at holding politicians accountable. They're actually terrible at doing that. But what they are good is at a contagious level of political engagement. That's really important for democracies. So help other people vote. You can apply for an absentee ballot, learn how to do it yourself, and then help other people to do it. You can become an election volunteer. If you go to my own website, I'm trying to start this democracy squad where I might help send Mason students to City of Fairfax and County of Fairfax to help them deal with this huge influx they've got of vote by mail. You can give to organizations that help to alleviate the various inequalities that we've talked about here. There's lots of great nonprofits out there. And young people like yourselves are particularly well positioned to engage in tutoring and mentoring and community service, particularly for other young people, in ways that are really helpful for addressing inequalities. So anything you can do to participate in community events and public meetings and just any of this type of civic action does help address inequalities and engage in a political civic process. So number one message is to vote and to help other people to vote. I've put the assigned readings in here. I've put a few other select references that I used to create the presentation in here. And here's my list of suggested books. Any of the topics that I've talked about today, none of these are about coronavirus in particular, but these books have really informed my understanding of how we got the political situation that we've got right now. And they're all written by top-notch political scientists. This is not partisan stuff. This is social science as applied to politics, using the scientific method to help explain rather than to advocate how politics works. All right, and I'm gonna leave it there and move back to questions and invite Bethany to help me navigate that.